Welcome back to Fighting Words. I'm Karisa Maxwell, joined as always by Tom Gray. Andreas Hale is on vacation this week, but that's not going to stop us from talking about the heavyweight showdown that is happening next weekend, December 23rd in Saudi Arabia. And it's Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, but they're not fighting each other. And every time I say that, it pains me because I believe this fight is the fight that we have wanted to see for 7 years now, Tom, and maybe it will happen in 2024. I know it's the number one fight we want to see happen, but let's talk about these two fighters individually and what led us to this fight card. Of course, this fight was supposed to be Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk for the undisputed heavyweight championship. But after a less than stellar performance, although a win by Tyson Fury in October against Francis Ngannou, that fight got pushed to 2024. So Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder stepped up to save the day and save the card, just not with each other. So why is this fight that we have wanted to see for the better half of a decade now still not happening next weekend?
I think because when the Tyson Fury fight went the way that it did, both of these guys, because, I mean, it's not a world title fight, but it's still massive. It's a signature fight for both men. You wouldn't want to only put 7 weeks into your training camp for such a career-defining fight. So ultimately, I think they were beaten on this occasion by the clock, which is why we've got a semi-final instead of the final. So that's ultimately why it's not happening in December.
But here's the thing. These aren't exactly tune-up fights. They're not easy fights. Anthony Joshua is fighting a colossal southpaw in Otto Wallin, and Deontay Wilder is fighting Joseph Parker. These are actually pretty high-caliber fights. And with that being said, how much risk is involved to the future, the career of Wilder and Joshua by taking on these opponents?
Yes, I just spoke to Otto Wallin about 10 minutes ago, and he is extremely confident. Sometimes you can see they're maybe trying to fake it, an opponent's trying to fake it, an underdog just doesn't maybe believe in himself quite as much as he's letting on, but there was no sign of that. He looked genuinely up for the fight. It's a fight that he's wanted for a long, long time. He's a southpaw. The last time Joshua was in against a southpaw, granted, it was Alexander Usyk, who's beaten him now over 24 rounds. It's a southpaw again, a bit easier to hit than Alexander Usyk, let's face it. But that's a tricky fight for Anthony Joshua. I think he wins it. I can see that perhaps the right-hand lead will work against Otto Wallin. I think he might walk on to one of them. Joseph Parker is still a top 10 rated heavyweight with Ring Magazine and with the Sporting News. So that sells itself. And I think because Wilder has been so inactive in recent years, he's had one round of action in like forever. You know, the last time he was really in a combat situation proper is against Tyson Fury, who for my money has beaten him 3 times. And sooner or later, you are going to pay the price for not going to work often enough. And it's well within Joseph Parker's ability, in my opinion, to outbox Wilder over a long period. It's whether he can avoid the big right hand. But if that fight goes to points, Karisa, there's no way that I would expect Deontay Wilder to be getting the decision. If it goes to points, it's a Joseph Parker win. Very tricky fights both ways.
And here's the thing. I mean, as you said, Wilder and Joshua have both suffered losses in their career since this fight was initially supposed to happen back in 2017 when they had all the belts. A lot has happened since then. And now people still want to see this fight, despite the fact that there are no titles on the line, despite that they have had these losses, especially, with Anthony Joshua losing to Alexander Usyk. You can't even really hold that against him because Usyk is he is an incredible force to be reckoned with. But then there's Andy Ruiz, right, where he suffered his first loss, which should have been a tune-up fight for Wilder. And then, there's Fury, who just ruins everything and beat Wilder and really just kind of secured the fight not happening. However, all these years later, if Wilder or Joshua lose, is there still interest in seeing this matchup happening? Is this still a fight that fans want to see?
Yes, I think so, because it's two thunderous punchers that are both vulnerable, and there's just nothing better than that in the heavyweight division, in any division actually. But the fact that it's at heavyweight, it's just such an attractive matchup. You know, it could be over in 6 minutes, but it could be so memorable. It retains a timeless quality. I mean, even if one of them lose, there's got to be a financial hit, I would imagine. You know, you're not going to make the same money, I don't believe. But it would still be massive paydays, I think, for both. It would still be a fight that fans would want to see. I still think it would be a massive event, absolutely. Fight fans the world over will be crossing their fingers, though, that neither guy loses.
And back in 2019, I interviewed Deontay Wilder, and this was before the second fight against Tyson Fury. So, you know, the whole topic of him versus Anthony Joshua was at its height because negotiations had been happening. And at that point, the conversation between Eddie Hearn and Wilder's team was, you know, AJ wanted $50 million. He wanted to fight in the UK. Wilder was like, okay, sure, let's do it. And according to Wilder, AJ's like, nah, just kidding. I don't want it to happen. So when you look back at that being the terms back in 2019, and now looking to see how the boxing landscape has changed as far as like, yeah, there's still prize fighters, obviously, but everything's moving to Saudi Arabia, where there's a lot more money at stake. So when you look at the fight where it was in 2019, 50 million in the UK, and it not coming to terms then with titles on the line, to now looking at this fight, if and when it does happen, 99% chance it's going to happen in Saudi Arabia because that's where the money is and they're already taking fights there. And knowing the purse that's being paid out in Saudi Arabia, does this non-title fight with two fighters who now have losses on their record have potential to actually make for a bigger payday now than it did at the height of their careers?
I don't think it's got the potential to be. I think you hit the nail on the head. The fact that it's in Riyadh and it's not 99% certain, it's 100% certain, let's face it, that's what no one else, Las Vegas, New York, the UK, no one can match the revenue that's been put up in Riyadh. So that's where it'll be going. It is a bigger payday. It is not a bigger fight because, as you know, at the time, if everything had went to plan back then, it was an undisputed championship fight. So in terms of history, it doesn't level up, but it's still the same fight. I mean, back then, we didn't really know perhaps the vulnerability that both guys had, but they were still enormous hitters. And that's what fans want to see. The heavyweight division is the glamour division. It crosses over to the casual fans. It's not just boxing fans. It would have been bigger historically. Now, yeah, it's a bigger payday.
But let's talk history. And I hate to put this bad juju out into the universe, especially at the end of the year. But if this fight does not happen after all of these years, it never comes to fruition. How big of a miss is that for this era of boxing? And where would it rank in the history of fights that fans never got to see?
The only one that I think would be missed more at heavyweight is probably Lennox Lewis against Riddick Bowe. They had an amazing rivalry that stretched all the way back to the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, where Lennox Lewis stopped Bowe. And it was just assumed that the stars would align and they would meet as professionals. But various things messed that up. Bowe put one of his belts in a trash can, literally, rather than fight Lennox Lewis. And the prevailing thought among a lot of fans is that Bowe didn't fancy the fight at the time. You've also got Mike Tyson and Riddick Bowe that didn't happen. But this one would be right behind those. Even without the titles at stake, sometimes a fight supersedes championship belts. And I think this one does. I think it would be devastating for the heavyweight division if we don't get to see it. And that's why I'm saying if one of them does get clipped in Riyadh, then I would still have interest in seeing it and hopefully it can still be salvaged. I mean, the ideal scenario is they both come through.
I agree. I know as a fan of the sport, I'd be heartbroken if this fight never happened because it's something that I know I've personally wanted to see for so long, but we're going to have to wait. Until then, the fight that is happening in Saudi Arabia, aside from their opponents, it's a stacked card. I mean, you also have Bivol against Arthur. You have Dubois against Miller. I mean, this is like a super fight card, something that we really haven't seen at least from what I can recall. So when we look at all the matchups that are happening on December 23rd, what do you expect to happen? And mind you, we will get more into the actual matchups on next week's episode. So tune in if you want to hear all the breakdowns for this card. But when you just look at the overall matchups, what do you expect to happen? And what do you think is ultimately going to come out and be the next steps based on what happens on Saturday, December 23rd in Saudi Arabia?
Okay. Firstly, it's slightly before your time, but the show is very reminiscent to Don King cards that were out in the early to mid 90s, where it was just stacked top to bottom. That's what it reminds me of very much. Okay. I think something silly is going to happen in one of these fights, and one of them are going to lose. And I'm starting to edge very slightly towards Joseph Parker being the one that spoils the party. I think Deontay Wilder's just been out for so long, and I don't think being out for that long is to any fighter's benefit. When you come in and you're rusty and you're second guessing yourself in terms of your timing and your distance, he is such a chilling puncher. He can just close it as quick as an eye blink, and I get that. But that's the one where I'm really worried about Deontay Wilder. I think Joseph Parker will be so up for this fight, and he is durable, but it's can he survive the Wilder right? We'll see. I expect Anthony Joshua to beat Otto Wallin and come through that fight. Some of the other ones, I think, Bivol wins, Opetaya wins. Daniel Dubois, I think and hope, beats Miller. So there's a lot of fights in there, but that's the predictions just now, but they could change.
I have lost track how many times I've asked this hypothetical question. And the funny thing is to your point, with inactivity, with losses, with performances, the answer has consistently changed whenever I ask you or Andreas or any of our coworkers on the combat team. But let's say Joshua, Wilder both pull off the wins. This fight is made in 2024. We're all very excited to watch this showdown happen in Saudi Arabia. As of right now, based on what we've seen from these two fighters, what would your prediction be for that fight, Anthony Joshua versus Deontay Wilder?
Now, this has changed on multiple occasions. I mean, and we've got a fight to watch, remember, so you can take a lot out of the fights that we're about to watch next week.
And I'm going to ask you this question again next week, so that's why I want to hear answers now.
Some days I think Joshua, some days I think Wilder. I like Fury over Usyk. No. I'll be Joshua today.
All right.
Joshua.
Well, I'm excited to watch this insanely stacked card next Saturday, December 23rd in Saudi Arabia on DAZN pay-per-view. Feel like there's going to be a lot of storylines set based on what happens on Saturday that are going to bring us into the new year. And hopefully we'll finally see this fight get made. I'm not holding my breath because I have gone back and I've looked, and for the past 3 years, this has been the number one fight that we want to see get made in the new year. It clearly has not happened. So hopefully good vibes going into 2024. We'll find out next weekend, but we'll be back next week to break down the whole card. Andreas will be back, so we will get some insight, get our picks and predictions in. But until then, make sure you subscribe, like, all that stuff. And I'm Karisa Maxwell for Tom Gray. We will see you back here next week on Fighting Words.